Hello, folks. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. My name is Roy Bensby, and I'm your host. And I want to explain a little bit about the podcast before we start the show this week. This podcast is an opportunity for me to speak with some of the most interesting people I know that I can find on the internet. So, either with amazing talents or achievements or just unbelievable life stories or invaluable insights into areas that they have dedicated their lives to studying. I sit down with these amazing individuals from all across the world. Really, I've talked to people from Slovenia to the Czech Republic to Australia to countries in Africa and South America, really just all over the world. And I try to ask them the questions that will hopefully help you extract something valuable or learn something new or just get inspired by. And I do hope that you do get inspired by these talks with some sort of a call to action, maybe change something that you wanted to change for a while, or even just enjoy, detaching from the world for an hour and listening to some great conversations. So whatever it is that you get from this, I do hope that you extract something from it and enjoy the conversations. All these episodes are available on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google, and the rest of them. You can also find the episodes on my website, which is roybensv.com. You can find a lot of other information about me there as well, from photos to a little bit more insights into who I am, if you're interested. And, you can always go to social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there. I'm pretty active on both those platforms, although the only ones I have. And I try to post regularly so you can stay up to date. And also be sure to put your email on the website. I shoot emails out with updates, news, any new current information that I have will be sent via those emails and social media platforms. So, yeah, make sure you're in the loop. All right, guys, today on the podcast, we have Eric Larsen. Eric is a polar adventurer, educator, and expedition guide. He has traveled to some of the coldest places on Earth. He just loves the cold. He's an awesome guy. I really enjoyed this conversation. We talked about his expeditions, the logistics, and the mental capacity and toughness that the one must have when going on these type of expeditions and adventures to the Arctic, to Antarctica, to Everest, Greenland, all the Arctic areas. And it's a really fascinating episode because you get a glimpse into the mindset and the preparation and what you have to endure to complete these type of missions. Eric is one of a handful of Americans to have skied to both the North and South Poles. So he's got extensive experience, like I said, in cold regions of this planet. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. And without further ado, here is Eric Larsen. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I've been following you for a long time, both on Instagram and on other places, and I've seen your talks and all your explorations and adventures. So I'm happy to finally get to talk to you.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Always fun to talk about snow and ice for sure.
I think everyone loves it, right? It's people's favorite thing: ice, snow, cold.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, how did you get interested in going to some of the coldest places on this planet? How is that what triggered this love initially?
Yeah, I think for me, there wasn't a moment where I just woke up one day and like, this is my path. It's partly just who I am, and it's partly how I've just evolved over time. I grew up in the Midwest of the States and did a lot of kids and we had, our main thing was winter. So like nobody ever thought twice about going out and going sledding or ice skating all day or skiing or whatever it was. So I never really grew up with a fear of winter, more just like it was an opportunity to be outside. And, I also read a lot of exploration journals as a kid. So I was always interested in kind of historical explorations that had occurred, and read those with an eye of like, oh, that's not crazy, but that would be really cool to do. Like, I wish I could do that. And so it was just kind of this process of gaining more and more experience, doing more adventures, following my interests, trying to be out in places that I had never seen personally, and then just kind of kept going from there, snowballed, so to speak.
Pardon the
Yeah.
pun. Hey, so you grew up in Wisconsin, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I feel like you guys have a different, because New Yorkers, for example, it gets very cold in New York,
Yeah.
right? It snows. I think it's one of the snowiest states in the country, and but New Yorkers don't like the snow, like and they don't like the cold. But I feel like people in Wisconsin, in that area, you kind of embrace the cold and the snow in winter much more than people in New England.
Yeah, I mean, New England weather, I mean, upstate New York, it's cold. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, those are cold places.
Yeah,
But you also have a lot of the influence of the ocean there. So the weather is just different a little bit. But I think for the Midwest, it's part of just a cultural mentality of just enduring whatever you get and not really complaining about it.
yeah,
And so that's, I think, a big part of it. Like, we just never thought twice about what was going on outside, just that we were going to put on our snow pants, and if we had snow pants, and just go do whatever. So I do think it's part of, I do think outdoor activity is a very regionally based thing. For example, I never saw a mountain until I was like 20 some years old. We didn't have mountains,
really,
so winter is kind of what we had. And I think people, just by their nature, are looking for kind of the challenges that exist in their environment, or adventurous people are looking for those types of challenges. And if you live in Hawaii, you're going to be spearfishing and surfing. And if you're down in the jungle, you're going to be doing stuff there. And if you're all the mountaineers who first attempted Everest that were Americans, were living in the Pacific Northwest, because that's where the big glaciated peaks were. So they were traveling in a similar environment. All the American North Pole explorers, almost all of them, in both recent and not so recent past, have either lived in Minnesota or spent a lot of time in Minnesota. Because that's
yeah.
what that's what the environment is, and that's where those kind of challenges and the extremes part of those environments exist.
You mentioned the Pacific Northwest and the people who kind of did Everest first, at least Americans. Did you see the documentary Dirtbag?
Yeah, Fred Becky.
Oh, yeah, Fred Becky, and he has like the most first ascents out of any.
Yeah.
Like that guy is wild, man.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think about that personality trait, which I don't have, because I do think that singular focus and almost maniacal obsession is really what creates these very successful people. They might not fit in society very well, but they become
Yeah,
experts because there is nothing else in their life. And I have a little bit of that, but not at that extreme. Like, I can go somewhere and have a normal conversation, and I live in a house, like, um and I'm not saying that's bad, but I see a lot of the positive attributes of that kind of maniacal obsession, whatever it is.
well, he has to be on the spectrum. I mean, he was just so singular in his
Totally.
focus, and they were showing, other guys, the founder of Patagonia and REI, and maybe some other big companies. They started a similar lifestyle, but at some point they quote unquote grew up. They decided, all right, we can really lead this industry, and they became titans. They became like huge,
Yeah.
and he just kind of like was set in his ways. No, I'm gonna keep doing. It's kind of like that. It's like the guy that wants to stay like a college frat boy like for his whole life, and I'm just gonna keep drinking. I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm never gonna like evolve into something
Yeah.
else. But there is something very interesting about it because
Totally. Well,
he has
it can end
so
up
many
either
first
way. It
effects.
can end up, boy, like that frat boy is pretty sad because what's he doing? But if you become the best frat boy in the entire world, like, there's something to be said about that. Like, I think achieving a high level of expertise in any facet or capacity is a pretty admirable goal. The hard part is like, how much can you endure to get there, and how much can society bog you down during that path? But nonetheless, I mean, it's an interesting topic for me because it's something that I think about a lot, and that I've had this singular passion my whole life, almost an obsession to the fault of everything else. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I'm at a point in my life now where I have two kids, and that's changing a little bit. And part of that is really hard because I see that trajectory that I was on kind of going like this. And I don't want to say my career's over, but it's just changed a little bit. And that's the reality of it. And, um, and it's still something that I'm figuring out as well.
Yeah. And just last point on Fred, what I liked about him personally was he wasn't necessarily like a risk taker. They mentioned in the movie that I think he barely had any serious injuries, right? Meanwhile, like all these people have died throughout the years or had serious injuries, and if they just left the sport behind. But he was someone that he could have been like 10 meters away from a summit and be like, no, 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 let's go back, let's go back. So
Yeah.
he was very like aware
Yeah.
of the risks that were involved.
Yeah.
He wasn't some crazy risk taker.
Totally. And I think most people at that level have that kind of awareness of their pursuit to understand like what is what. And part of it is just understanding that's a process, and it's not always about the end result. And so like when you look at things as a process, each step is an important part of that piece. And so whether you achieve the end is just a small part of that whole bigger thing. And then you also, I think, when you're that obsessed, and I see this a little bit myself, is there's steps to each action that you take, and there's a mentality, kind of an expedition mentality that I call it, where you're never checking out. You're constantly always assessing the situation and then reassessing and then reassessing again. How am I at this moment? How am I at this moment? And then making a plans objectively as a result of that case. I think too often some of these crazy situations happen because you reach a certain level of experience and then you just shut your mind off and you say, "Oh, I'm the master," you know. And the reality is as soon as you do that, that's when the dangerous things happen. And if you study kind of like accidents and survival situations, a lot of these experts have gotten these situations where they shut their brain off in a way, and they make decisions based on prior information, not what they're seeing in that moment.
Yeah. But for you, it's a little bit different, right? Like, for example, for him, he felt that it's risky. The weather was changing fast, whatever it was, he could just kind of go down the mountain and he'd be out of harm's way. But if you're in the Arctic or if you're in Antarctica and you're, halfway through the expedition and something happens, there's not too much that you can do. There's not a lot of backtracking to do, right?
Yeah.
You're
Well,
kind of out there by
and
yourself.
that's the kind of contrast to what I do to what somebody like Alex Honhold does, or Fred Becky, or a skier or base jumper. They're in that moment in a split second. They get to that point and they're on that edge, and it's very stark. You're either safe or you're not safe, or whatever it is. And for me, in polar travel, it's more of this like long drawn out process. It's a chess game. And so
Mhm.
that's what I enjoy about it, is that you have to be very deliberate and disciplined for, not just days, but weeks and months ahead of that time, so that when you do get to that point, you have the ability to deal with it. And so there's a lot that goes into that buildup where everything is fine, but it's just how much you sleep, how much you eat, how are you traveling, your equipment, like all these things add up, and there's an accumulative effect that can become overwhelming. And then, yeah, like you said, there's a remoteness to these areas where there's some pretty dire consequences if something goes wrong. Things are changing a little bit now, and our logistics ability is changing dramatically. But that's how I would kind of compare those two situations.
When you're climbing a mountain, it's a little bit more dynamic, right? There's a set goal, there's a summit, you can see it sometimes, and there's this beautiful vistas, and it's very different, right? But when you're in the Arctic or in Antarctica,
or maybe even Greenland, it's for the most part it's fairly flat. It's fairly the same. It's just sheets of white ice, and a lot of times, like from the videos I've seen, it's just snow out, so you can't even see too far in advance. Like, how do you stay mentally sharp through that? Because I'm assuming that's the toughest, just mental capacity to
Yeah.
stay through,
Yeah.
through that.
The physical aspects are challenging, but I do feel like in these big, long, month, 2 long expeditions, the mental aspect is equally as challenging. And it's really counter to how we live our lives right now. I mean, we go from this to that to this. We have a million different stimuli, we're texting, and if somebody doesn't text you back in 3 seconds, they're probably dead. And in an expedition in Antarctica and Greenland specifically, the Arctic Ocean is a very dynamic place and constantly changing. But Antarctica is just, it's white nothing for months.
Yeah.
And so dealing with that absence of stimuli is a huge challenge unto itself. And it's one that I still haven't necessarily figured out. I just try to do it as best as I can. Big part of it is really focusing on that next step, and we break up the thing into smaller pieces. And you don't think about the end of the expedition on day one. It's like getting to lunchtime, and then the next hour, and then the next, and so we have this really rigorous schedule and the system that we adhere to, and that allows us to kind of take what looks like this just unimaginable amount of time. I mean, imagine doing the same thing for 2 months straight and not seeing anybody else. It's just like, I even thinking back, it's hard for me to really understand it. It's just so abstract. Yeah, it's a challenge. And so, we do a lot of stuff with our structure and schedule. I listen to a lot of podcasts and stories and songs, which now is great, because back in the day it was like we could load up like maybe 6 albums of songs, and that was it, on an MP3 player. And I also do, a big part of my expeditions is about kind of telling stories as I'm traveling. And so I try to write a blog post every day, and I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about or not thinking about that day, and what are the interesting aspects, trying to convey to people what it's like to be out there, and just trying to appreciate the unique aspects of that place. I'm always, with the blog post, I'm always trying to think like, what's the unique aspect of this day? And, or what's the defining thing of this day? And, we'll start out and we'll go through some sort of challenge in the morning. I'm like, oh yeah, this is what this day is about. And then a couple hours go by and it's something completely different, So it's a roller coaster. That's the bottom line. And it's never just easy, but it's just up and down constantly.
So even with the monotony and the routine, you still are able to find like something that sticks out or something that stands out every single day to write about. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I try. I mean, I don't know if I succeed, but I mean, if you look, I will say I have gone back to my blog post and written something and be like, oh, I wrote about this same thing 10 years ago, so I just forgot about it. But it's a beautiful place. I like being outside. I've always felt that a physical journey of any kind is a really good springboard to talk about bigger ideas and issues. And so, and I consider myself a somewhat creative person and thoughtful person as well. And so being able to use that journey and each one of the steps as a platform for that, I think is really interesting to me.
Do you think you're better at handling misery than other people? Because I can't imagine, no one likes to suffer. Like, I can't imagine that you like feeling like, oh, I'm freezing, I'm about to like, whatever. But you persevere, you go through the fire, and you become a better person on the other side. But I think a lot of people would just be like, no, screw this, I'm out of here. I can't handle the misery day in and day out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's what it is. It's misery day in and day out, and week in and week out, and uncomfortableness and fatigue and all this stuff. And so, can I handle that better than other people? I don't think so. Do I have a better attitude about it? Probably. Do I see the rewards in that difficulty? Yeah. So I don't think I have any sort of better physical or mental gifts than anybody else. But I do find that I enjoy the challenge of difficulty a lot and coming out of the other side. And in the moment, it sucks for anybody, myself included. But every once in a while, you get the situation where it sucks for 2 months and then you've broken through and you did it and you're like, wow, man, that was awesome. I got to remember this. And that sustains me a lot of times, actually. And so I feel like that's a positive aspect. And I also have a really kind of anti-complaining philosophy. So I'm not a big complainer. So I think that helps. And I also really believe that people have the ability to overcome a lot of situations, difficult situations. You just have to put yourself in a place to be successful. And sometimes that just means, for me, not having a choice or a way out, you know? So it's just like, you're in it. What are you going to do? You know, you're going to cry and give up? Can't, because you're going to die then. So might as well just keep going.
Well, all those things you mentioned are mental advantages because most people don't have those. Most people like to, or not,
Yeah.
again, I don't want to say most people, but a lot of people, they do like to complain and they don't like to suffer and they don't like to go through adversity. So the fact that you do like those things and you can persevere through those things are an actual mental advantage.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not like I don't think I was necessarily born that way, but I do think you get better at those things over time. And again, for me, maybe it's just the advantages. I've been able to refine my mindset to find joy in kind of like featureless extreme environments. But it's funny because my son, we have this little philosophy that he, like, when things are difficult, he ends up having more fun. Maybe that's a genetic trait, because he, we'll be doing something and it'll be easy and I'll be dragging, we were be Nordic skiing and we're like, let's go. And he's just like bored and whatever. And then all of a sudden we go off the trail and we set this kind of random goal far away. And it's just like, he's unstoppable all of a sudden. So, I do feel like part of that is definitely a mindset for sure.
Yeah. I don't think stuff that is easy or that comes to you with a certain ease. I agree. I don't think it's as fun as or as much of character building as something that you kind of have to struggle a little bit with, something that you're like, oh snap, like it was hard, I did it, and now I feel better about
Yeah,
myself.
and I think
So
I think you have to practice that mindset, because so much of our lives now is in this trajectory of comfort and convenience. And so that's where our society is going. And I'm not going to argue, like, is that good or is that bad? I think there's a lot of modern convenience that I really enjoy. But as I kind of evolve in my expeditions, what I realize is the things that I enjoy about these trips is some of these, ideas that are associated with a different style of life than what we have now. And so part of that is I have seen the rewards that come out of pushing myself and experiencing adversity and being self-reliant. And as a result, I seek out more of those. I enjoy this kind of disconnectedness, so to speak, and the idea of silence and being in environments without being inundated with other things. And man, I'm on my phone just as much as anybody else, but I do think there are parts of each one of those things. And that's one of the reasons I really like expeditions, is there are really important parts of those things that we're kind of moving away from. But I think we could stand to benefit from taking a little bit those ideas into our normal life, because I think they are really valuable. They're empowering, they're confidence building, whatever, however you want to look at it.
I think especially nowadays in modern society, we are fascinated and intrigued by people like yourself or Alex Honnold or Jimmy Chin or all these other adventurers and polar explorers and mountaineers, because I feel like that's just inherently us. Like we've moved away from all that, right? With modernity and technology and industrialization. But in our DNA, that is who we are. Like being outdoors
Yeah.
is inherent in us. But and we kind of like battle with that all the time. Like, oh, that's amazing. I would love to do that. But hey, my phone and work and job, and we
Yeah.
gotta, it's just the disconnect. And I think people want to, but they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and
I think so.
that's the other part of it. It doesn't you don't have to go to 0 to 1,000 either. That's the other hard part with social media and whatnot is all we see are these like shining examples of these hyper real situations. Instagram especially, where you see this tiny little snapshot of this bigger story, and so people think, well, I can't get to that ultimate perfection from my like desk. And that's kind of what my point was earlier is like we don't have to go from 0 to 100 in like 2 seconds. Just walk outside in the rain, whatever for a little while. Don't have your phone when you go out for a little walk through the park. There are a lot of these little pieces that are equally rewarding in a lot of ways, and quite honestly, like those are things that I try to practice in my life as well. Just even getting out to exercise regularly, like all those things. Again, I feel like you said, I do think that is part of our kind of identity as a race, which is this connection to the outdoors, connection to nature, connection to adventure. So I think having those integrated into our modern lives has a lot of value.
This might be a dumb question. Which one is more difficult? I don't know if you can compare them because they're so different. But if you can, like, which one would you say is more difficult? The North Pole, Antarctica, or summiting Everest?
North Pole. I mean, there are
Really?
some difficult. I mean, again, I'm not a huge mountaineer. I've done a lot of mountaineering expeditions, but I wouldn't say like I'm a trailblazing mountaineer. And, there are some difficult routes on Everest that would be challenging. But, if you're going from the north or the south, it's a standard route. The data is out there. There can be some variables, but it's also terra cognita. Quite honestly, in modern mountaineering, there's a lot of infrastructure there. You have a lot of help, even for me. I used oxygen because I'd never summited an 8,000 meter peak before. I was psyched that we were there in the fall, which was a really unique experience. So it was just myself and a few Sherpas on the mountain. And so that was an amazing experience. But like overall, at the end of the day, when I got done, we had spent 13 days on the mountain or something like that out of a total of 45 at base camp or total in there. It was difficult, but it wasn't like there's a lot of rest. Antarctica is kind of like skiing the South Pole on a standard route. Again, there's not a lot of information, but I always I draw a map and we start at the bottom. I make an X and we start at the top, and it's just a blank white sheet of paper, and that's our map of the route. And so it's pretty straightforward. I don't bring a thermometer. I don't check the weather. Every day I wake up and we travel, and then 10 hours later we stop skiing and set up the tent, and then the next day it's the same. But the North Pole, I will say, in the Arctic Ocean is a very challenging expedition, especially if you're doing it, in a style where it's unsupported, where you don't have any sort of resupplies. The surface is constantly changing. The temperature is extreme. Just the physical camping, being in a tent, is hard and challenging. So I love that trip, but it's hard as all get out. I've done 3 full expeditions to North Pole. I guide these shorter trips there, but I still want to go back and do more trips there because it's a constantly changing environment. There's really few other places where hour by hour, the surface is changing. And so you're on ice that's always doing something different. And so you got to be on all the time. And, it's just a physical challenge as well. And mentally too.
Well, you could be 100 miles, like let's say, I don't know, whatever, day 20, right? You're like, let's say 100 miles from the target. And then you wake up in the morning and then you're 130 miles away because
Yeah.
the whole landscape just shifted back,
Yeah.
right?
Not probably 30 miles in an overnight,
Yeah, yeah.
but there would be times when you would drift 5 miles and a couple of those would be in exact opposite direction where you want to go, so you'd be drifting over here and then, the pole's here. And again, it's a mindset thing. It can be really disconcerting to feel like you're traveling on a conveyor belt, losing progress. But it's, again, back to that chess game where you're putting in your time, you're making your moves carefully, you have this bigger plan. As challenges come up, you amend it. and then just try to ride that roller coaster as best you can, man. And so when the highs are good, know that it's going to get bad. And when it's really bad, know that it's going to get a little better. It's never going to be awesome because there's just this kind of like blanket of fatigue and weariness over you. But at some point, 2 months down the road, you've made all those moves and you get to have that breakthrough moment, and it makes it all worthwhile, you know?
How much effort do you put into not getting eaten by a polar bear?
Not much, actually. You just kind of hope for the best, actually. Yeah, in that area, depends on where we are. You know, I do a lot of traveling around Svalbard, which is in Arctic Norway, and there are polar bears there. And, you know, we're much more deliberate because there's more people and more bears there, and they're more accustomed to people in the bad way. And so we have a tripwire around our tent and flares, shotgun, and all these things. And so we have similar minus the tripwire as we're traveling. And at the end of the day, it's just kind of being hopeful that they don't show up. And in that sense, you know, most days it works out, but we've had polar bears come up behind us, you know, and kind of follow in our tracks as we're skiing along. And I've had them come and jump on my tent while I'm sleeping in it. And, you know, we started putting some skis around the tent, and you'd think that would be a silly polar bear deterrent, but 9 times out of 10, the polar bears trip over the skis and wake you up. So it works pretty well.
Oh, that's frightening. They're so big.
Yeah, they are.
They're
They are, and they're dangerous. I will say in those areas, they're looking for food. And so they're trying to figure out if you're food. And so in that sense, you have a little bit of time to persuade them that you're not food. And, you know, you can contrast that with like a grizzly bear. Grizzly bears attack because they're just grumpy, mean, angry animals, and they see you as a threat. They're not looking to eat you. But a polar bear wants to eat whatever it can. And so you do have a little bit of a time there to hopefully suggest that you're not food.
I'm in New England, and we have black bears, and I feel like the difference, and they're, you know, it's still a bear, but I feel like they're much more timid. They're much smaller. It's almost like the difference between like a Chihuahua and like a German Shepherd,
Yeah.
between like a
Yeah.
black bear and a polar bear.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen videos of polar bears like attacking, and whew, it's scary, man. It's really scary. Like I've seen a video of a girl taking her dog out, and she lives in Svalbard, and like she has a rifle with her, like
Oh, yeah.
always. She doesn't leave the house with her.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the law there. Yeah, I mean, that's a way of living, a way of life when you live in those places. And definitely they can be very aggressive, especially now when they're running out of sea ice, and you know, so they're losing some, you know, their main diet is seals, and they hunt those on the sea ice. And so as you get freeze ups coming later and thaws coming earlier, they don't have as much time to hunt. And so when they're hungry, they're ornery. The other really cool thing is that they're just so uniquely adapted to that environment. I mean, we follow polar bear tracks on expeditions all the time, and you know, they amble through these pressure ridges. They see open water. They just go right, swim across it, get out the other side, you know, in a matter of minutes. And it takes us, you know, an hour to traverse some of that stuff. And so it is pretty incredible how remarkably they are adapted to that environment. I mean, when I travel to the Arctic, and especially as well as, you know, Antarctica, I mean, we might as well be on Mars. There is nothing that sustains our life there. I mean, sure, we can melt snow for water, but that's it. I mean, we have to bring everything else that we need to live and survive. And so, you know, if it's not in our sled, we don't have it. And, you know, to look at a polar bear who just walking around, living like a boss with just its claws and white coat, you know, like that's pretty amazing.
And I mean, again, like this is his territory. I feel like, you know, we humans are explorers by nature, right? Like we came out of Africa, and we basically colonized every single piece of land on this planet. And there were animals there, and we either somehow coexisted with them, or we made them extinct,
Yeah.
for lack of a
Totally. Yeah. And
So I was just gonna say, like, even, you know, when people go in the ocean and, you know, you get stung by a jellyfish, or some people die by a shark attack. It's just sometimes it's the price you have to pay when you go into an animal's territory. Unfortunately, that's what it is.
Yeah, and it's an overall part of the challenge, and I think it also is this kind of greater respect for our environment. I think, again, kind of back to like modern society, like we think we can control everything, and it's just a good reminder that
Hmm.
we're not necessarily the top dog in every situation that we get into. And so it's a good kind of mental attitude to understand that you're not in charge. And I think on the expedition side of things, it's a really valuable strategy to know that there's a lot of stuff that is impacting your ability to survive, and understanding it kind of helps you be successful as well as just alive.
We're definitely at the bottom of the food chain. I mean, if we didn't have tools, if we didn't have guns, I mean, a squirrel could fuck you up. A squirrel could like run up on you, like gouge your eye out within a split second. You wouldn't even know what
Yeah.
hit you. So
Yeah,
luckily,
yeah.
like tools.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy though, because humans aren't specialists, we're generalists. And I look at a lot of that in terms of my success as well. Like I'm not really good at any one thing. Like I'm not the best athlete, I'm not the best whatever, but I'm pretty decent at a bunch of things, and that's really served me in what I do as well. And so, when you look at kind of the Earth's biodiversity, the survivors, for better or worse, are the generalists, and as our environment changes, it's the specialists that unfortunately suffer as a result. So don't get too good at
Yeah,
anything, because
and
you're going to get
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best.
yeah.
To talk about what we just kind of touched on, part of your thing is getting the message across, right? Talking about these places and really bringing it to the forefront of people's attention. But how hard is it to get this message across when you're talking about a place that 99% of humans are never actually going to physically see?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, and that's where it really started for me, was with kind of that idea that people just don't have a connection to the Arctic at all. It's just so abstract. And then you top it off with people who are like, "Hey, I don't want to be cold anyways." Like, no big deal.
Yeah.
And so, my path has been a long process, and I don't know if I've really hit on the perfect solution in terms of what I'm doing in my advocacy. But I will say, like, starting out, it was more about just like, hey, let me just go up there and I'll talk to a few people about, like, oh yeah, it's white and there's some ice and it's moving around, and saw some water, and I'm just a normal person. I'm not a scientist, I'm not, whatever. And so that's really where it started out. And I still feel like that kind of first person narrative has a lot of value in advocating for these places. It's just a question of like, where does that go from there? And that's still something, whether it's like political activism or even just education or whatever, that I still kind of am trying to navigate and find the best path. But I still believe in
Yeah.
that kind of process of going out, because not everybody has the ability to do those types of trips, but that doesn't mean that people can't be interested or surprised about them and those places.
It's funny you mentioned in the beginning. I have heard people say that they are, I don't want to say happy about climate change or global warming, but they're okay with it if it's going to bring them, like you said, people don't like cold, right? And I've heard people say, like, oh, we're going to have less ice, it's going to be warmer. The Arctic is going to have these paths for ships and it's going to make it shorter and all these things. And it's almost like they're living in a vacuum,
Yeah.
like they don't realize all the other
Yeah.
issues that
Well, yeah,
come
you look
with
at you
that.
look at just the United States this year. You look at the wildfires, you look at the hurricanes, you look at droughts and all these other things, and you can't tug on one thing and have it be completely independent of everything else on our planet. And so, yeah, sure, you can get a ship from point A to B maybe a little easier, but all the cities along the coast are flooded and wiped out. So, I mean, that's a cataclysmic view of everything, but yeah, it's all connected. So you really have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, I mean, could we see a point in 10 years where I don't know, 15 years where you're not able to do the Arctic
Oh
exploration
yeah.
anymore? Like
Yeah.
it's just not going
Yeah,
to
and
be
I think
an option.
there's the ability to do trips, like the sea ice will be there, there'll be a winter season, but in this kind of like modern style where we have this logistical support from planes or whatever is not going to be possible. There's just it's already changing very dramatically, my in terms of like being able to land a plane or have any sort of infrastructure on the sea ice where even 10 years ago, it was pretty standard operating procedure to be able to set up these kind of seasonal bases on the sea ice. And so that affects kind of modern adventuring, not necessarily exploration, but adventuring. There's some adaptation that people will be able to do, but which will present new and interesting challenges too. So, on the exploration side of things, but it's hard for me on a personal level because, I've dedicated 20 years to this very specific style of travel. And as much as I say I'm a generalist, my strength, my wheelhouse is, quite honestly, traveling on that sea ice. And so I'm a dinosaur in that sense. I'm the specialist with the niche on only one thing. And when that thing is gone, I don't know what to do. Like polar bears aren't going to go down to Costa Rica and eat bananas. So I'm in the same boat a little bit.
So I'm trying to think, would we be able to move them somewhere? Is that an
Yeah,
option even,
I
or
know.
you just let nature do its thing, and if they die out, they die out?
I mean, what is the statistic? 95% of all, or you know, animal species are extinct that have existed on the surface. Of course, it's dinosaurs and mastodons and all these other things. So, I think it's a conversation that's unrealistic, mitigation or whatever. I think what we really just need to look at is, what do we need to reduce carbon emissions? It's a pretty straightforward idea because, again, those animals are adapted to live in that environment, and that's where our efforts should lie. And those other types of conversations don't really, I feel like, add a really helpful solution. That being said, they're already starting to see some areas where polar bears have made it with grizzly bears or whatever, and you see some hybrid animals in Alaska and whatnot. Yeah,
Really?
because their
Wow.
habitats are overlapping a little bit more.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't hear about that. So what kind of bear, what kind of cub would they have?
Half grizzly bear, half polar bear. Yeah. I think initially it was thought, I read a couple articles on it, was really interesting, that that's what was happening like everywhere. But I think there was just like one polar bear that was like, man, that grizzly bear is hot, and ended up mating with that grizzly bear quite a bit. And so you have a couple of generations now of this hybrid, and I'm not sure much beyond that what's happened with everything. So yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about expeditions. How difficult is it to put together, an expedition logistically, physically, mentally, financially? I mean, it's a pretty big undertaking, right?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, almost 15 years ago, we would spend 3 years working on one project. And, my goal really has always been to push the leading edge of adventure. And so the reality is trying to do unique expeditions, things that haven't been done before. We're not necessarily discovering new places, but we're trying to challenge ourselves in different ways. And so whether that's, in 2006, we did the first ever summer expedition in the North Pole, South Pole, and Everest all in a year, things like that. Trying to bike to the South Pole, trying to find those edges and kind of unique challenges that aren't just totally arbitrary. But for example, when we went to the North Pole in summer, nobody had ever done that trip before. So we couldn't really call anybody up and be like, hey, what are the boots that we need to do? What's the sled? We had to do all that stuff on our own and research and test, different kayaks and canoes to be able to pull like sleds and training trips. And also the thing about polar travel is that the budgets are just prohibitively expensive. So we had to fundraise all this stuff. And yeah, that process just took 3 years. And, my Save the Poles, Three Poles expedition is very similar. I was working on that for about 2 years. And when I had set out to do that, I had never really done much mountaineering either. So I had to get a lot of that mountaineering experience, starting out by just taking a glacier course, travel course, and then climbing a 14. I mean, I hadn't even been up 14,000 feet yet, so climbing a 14er in Colorado and, just little things and just taking that step. But what you realize is these are just problems to be solved. And when you start dividing them up, okay, what are the things that I need to do? And what I've always said is you have to kind of be focused on each part. So in modern exploration, you might see some people who are really great marketers, and they might get all these sponsors on board. But if you're not trained up, you can have all the money in the world. You're not going to be able to do the trip. You got to be able to do the logistics and understand that network and make those arrangements and reach out to potential providers. And so again, you might be in the best physical shape, but if you don't have your logistics dialed, you're not going anywhere. Or if you can't do the marketing, you're not gonna, you can be as strong as Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever, but you're not going anywhere if you don't have the money. And so each one of those things is a really valuable part. And to me, that meets a lot of my interests because every day you wake up and there's something else going on, but it's a challenge and it requires a singular focus. That being said, as I do like setting those big challenges because it really focuses you on what needs to get done. And so it's like, should I go out party with my friends? No. Should I go do this other random trip? No. Whereas when I'm in this in between time of expeditions, I'm like, oh, I'll go do this over here and we'll do this other thing over here. And I get interested in too many other side projects. And so, that planning is a little different. Now I would say there's a lot more pressure to be cranking out trips. And so it's not 3 years, but if, I'm kind of on this like 2-year cycle of doing big trips, but then I do a lot of other stuff in the meantime as well. It's like back in the day, it was like one thing, 3 years. And now it's like in the 2-year span, I'm guiding, I might do a month trip across Greenland in that time. I've guide to the North Pole. I do polar training courses. I'm doing these other state trips, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of other stuff going on in that same amount of time doing photography, whatever else it is. But it's still, there's a lot of effort that involves fundraising hundreds of thousands of dollars and whatnot, so it's, for me, it's more on a 2-year cycle.
So do you have a team that helps you with the fundraising, with the logistics, with the marketing, or are you a one-man team?
I'm a one-man band, man. And that's, it's unfortunate. There are people that are better business people than me that I think that have had a little more success as a result. Yeah, I kind of do everything on my own. It takes a lot of effort. A lot of it I really enjoy. I like all aspects of it. And so, yeah, it's a primary focus, and it's a hustle too. Nobody's just calling me up and saying, here's a bunch of cash, here's an awesome opportunity. Like that doesn't happen for people like me, like I gotta you get the foot in the door but wait, so, but that's another challenge too.
Well, with time, like, wouldn't you, I think maybe over the years, develop relationships with maybe some big sponsors, some big companies, and develop that over time, make it easier than it was. I'm sure it's easier now than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, right? I mean, I can, in the outdoor industry, I mean, not, everybody knows who I am. And, I've worked with some of my companies like MSR, Stanley, Thermarest for over a decade, and so that's definitely an advantage. And I do have random stuff that pops up. People do, contact me about this, that, or the other thing. So there's the trajectory is like this, but like you stop moving too long and, somebody else is going to be at the forefront. So it's an interesting place. I love everything about what I do. So, but it's challenging, but so is everything else. My latest philosophy, which isn't maybe a new philosophy, but I've just had I broke my collarbone mountain biking this summer and I've had a few little health issues. I just got sick, all my guiding stuff has gotten canceled. And it's just like, I just got to remember, it's like the obstacle is the path. It's not these big moments of effortlessness and then a little obstacle. It's just like the hardship is the majority of the time, and then you get these brief moments of positivity. And so that's what I just got to remember. But I like that too. That's a polar expedition, basically.
You like the grit.
Yeah.
How much training goes into, or what kind of training just goes into before a big expedition? Let's say something in the Arctic or Antarctica. What is your training process?
Yeah. I mean, I think for now, I'm trying to be active. I mean, every day do something, whether that's biking. I spend a lot of my time, I love biking. So I spend a lot of my time on the bike. And in the summer, I'm, riding 3, 4, 5 hours a day pretty regularly. So that's a really good overall fitness for me. And then, skiing and Nordic skiing in the winter time. And then depending on what our trip is, kind of working on some more specific training things. And so whether that's pulling, usually a lot of it for polar stuff is pulling tires, or like traveling with a weighted pack, 50-pound, just like rocks, or I use like milk jugs filled with water, and doing some hiking and things like that. And then honestly, the other thing I've done is just I start doing some of these other adventures. I do these random state adventures across different states as part of this like United States of Adventure project that I'm working on. And we just set up a traverse of a state by 3 sports, and I time those a lot as training, because we're like biking 120 miles a day, we're hiking depending on the terrain, but 12 or 14 hours. It's just like a sufferfest as well. But I use those kind of like fun adventures as training for bigger stuff.
That does sound fun, I have to say. How many pounds do you usually lose in, let's say, in an Arctic expedition or in
Yeah,
Antarctica?
I mean, I try not to lose too much. I mean, you're more efficient when you're getting energy from your food versus your body. So depending on the trip, like a big 2-month long trip will probably lose 5 or 6 pounds, maybe a little more. But ultimately, like, we're planning pretty carefully the caloric intake. And if anything, we're just leaned out a little bit more. But like I said, I'm pretty active most of the time. The thing that messes me up a little bit is traveling, like in between trips, like doing speaking gigs and being a soccer dad or whatever it is. And that's kind of when I fall off a little bit. And so, if anything, expeditions, I'm just kind of more fit. That being said, the bigger, harder trips, you're not like coming back from those like as a uber athlete. You're kind of always on this downward path of losing muscle mass and strength. So you're just trying to hold on as best you can.
How hard is it to shoot in, because I love this is where I think I initially saw you on Instagram, and I love your photos. But how hard is it to shoot in sub-zero, minus 40, 50-mile winds with gusts, and the gear is just not built for those type of cold, extreme, weathers?
No.
Are there tricks that you developed, or how do you do
Yeah,
it?
I mean, the gear is getting a lot better and smaller, as you know. And I think, if you were to just like have a car running and all warm and just go out and shoot some of that stuff, it's not that bad. I mean, you can be dressed, you can have a warm battery, you can have all the gear, blah, blah, blah. The thing that makes it difficult is when we're simultaneously involved in achieving a difficult physical objective on that day or week or whatever. And so when you compound the extreme environment with physically having to make time, I mean, it becomes very difficult. I'm not setting up pictures. I'm not getting all the proper settings correct. What I'm trying to do is capture these moments in an aesthetic way as possible in the moment. And so part of that oftentimes is just being there and having the physical energy to get the camera out, having the mindset that that's an important part of your trip, because it takes away from the miles that you're making. Every time you stop, it takes extra energy. You only have a finite amount of food. And then part of it is also creating infrastructure around like how you do that. When do I shoot? So, you asked a little bit about cameras, and I usually will have like a smaller point and shoot that'll be like in my base layer here, and I'll have it on a string and I'll pull it out, and that'll be warm, and I'll be able to take a couple quick shots. And then maybe after one of our breaks, I'll have one of my bigger cameras that I'll get out for just a couple of those little shots, and then I'll put that away. And so there's that aspect of it. And then when you have that kind of bigger equipment that requires more weight, requires more power, and so there's a little bit more effort with that. On the positive side, I love photography, and I also am constantly trying to find creative ways to capture that environment and us traveling in it that evokes some sort of feeling about what it's like for people. And so I find a lot of personal joy there. And if anything, what I have to do is like, okay, don't get your camera out right now as much as you want to, because we need to be moving. So it's a little bit of a balance, but there's a lot that goes into it. And I kind of look at I call my photography like real reality. You go on Instagram, you see amazing pictures, and I'm jealous of these shots, but you see the person on the mountain with the tent and the sleeping bag, drinking their coffee outside at sunrise.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, man, if I'm in a tent, it's either we're sleeping or we're packing up and going. I'm there. I'm not sitting in a sleeping bag outside anywhere. We're eating and drinking as fast as we can so that we have enough energy to keep going. And so for me, what I want to do is capture these real situations that we're going through. Like I do some photo shoots and whatnot, but where we're just out there just to shoot. But for expeditions, it's we're not setting up anything. It's just how it unfolds, and so it's how can we capture those real moments in in a compelling way, in a high quality as way as possible, and that's a challenge that I really enjoy, and also that kind of focused style of photography, which is a little bit more expedition style than straight up like pro shooter.
I'm so with you on the Instagram thing. I feel like so many of those are staged. Like they'll just stage the whole shot and then they'll just go back to the tent or go back to their car or go back to the hotel, whatever it is. It'll just be for the gram,
Yeah.
not really because that's how they're spending the night or enjoying
Yeah,
life, whatever it
and
is.
part of that I like. Me again as a photographer, and I see those, and I'm like, wow, that's a really great shot. Like I get why people like that. I get why a product. It's a good way to market. It's inspirational. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's beautiful. It makes me want to be in that same situation. The problem is that idea is not necessarily separated from the reality of like what you're talking about. And so we communicate that picture with this false narrative rather than, we should just look at it as modeling or whatever, or art, rather than these like real stories. And so that's something that I think about a lot. I'm not sure where I land on it, except that, my goal is to not necessarily go down that path and really try to capture these more real moments as they occur. And unfortunately, some of those aren't as aesthetically pleasing as, the sunrise of the tent with the rain fly off. It's like, it's just how it goes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the problem is, like you said, it's the false pretense of how they're advertising themselves. It's like there'll be like a shot within a van, and they're kind of like with socks, and the vista is this beautiful vista, and they're just with their hot cocoa and the dog,
yeah.
and there's lights all around, and it's a beautiful shot. It's amazing. It's like, wow, I want to live like
Yeah.
that. And the problem is, like, for some reason, they can't just say it's not as a compelling of a caption to say, "Oh, we set up this shot because we think it's beautiful." It's like, "Oh, this is how we woke up," or
Yeah.
and that lack of authenticity in what they're selling. On the other hand, if you were to say it as it was, it wouldn't be as compelling, right? Like if you were to say, like, this is just a shot that we wanted to do, it wouldn't sell the same. So yeah, it's I'm also kind of not sure where I stand on that as
Yeah.
well.
I mean, I would say I know where I stand. The problem is like, how do I tread in that water? And I think for me, another kind of philosophy of mine is again that real reality. And I think what happens is when you start going down that path, you aren't able to distinguish reality from fiction. And so you start behaving in a way of how people want to see you versus how you are. And that just becomes this whole other disingenuous thing. On the expedition side of things, it leads to some really bad things happening with people lying about their trips, making up trips, just because of this idea of like, we're always our best persons, or we're always this, we've created this false narrative around our actions. And so, I don't know if it's by default because of who I am, or if it's counter to that idea, but I've always tried to be as frank as I possibly can with some of that stuff. And on the Instagram side of things, like, I love those pictures, but I hope there is some sort of kind of reckoning at some point in the future where we can, either look at those things or as art or advertisement separately, because I think in terms of art and advertisement and aesthetic, like, they're amazing, but they're not reality.
You're a big deal now. I saw that you have your first stalker.
Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. That was weird.
And I've been talking to a few people recently, and it's funny. Like, you're not the first. You don't have to nowadays. You don't have to be a Brad Pitt, right?
Yeah.
You have to have maybe 50,000 followers on Twitter or on Instagram or on YouTube, and people come out of the woodwork. So that's just I know it's a little bit offshoot, but it's an interesting thing. I wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. People can say I've had people criticize me over the years, so it's nothing new. And it must be nice to be out spending daddy's money, whatever. And I was like, okay, well, you should have told me I wasn't spending daddy's money when I got my first paper out when I was 12 years old, like making $5 a week. I get it. But when that starts pushing out to kind of acquaintances or family members, it becomes a little disconcerting. And especially now, you just don't know what people are capable of. And I'm an optimist. I like to see the best in everybody, but I have a family, and that stuff can be nerve wracking, as well as just like that. It's kind of what we talked about with the obsession, with Fred Becky. Like, there's the positive side of that obsession where it's channeled really well to a good outcome or a productive outcome that's not harming anybody or society. The negative aspect of that obsession is harming an individual or a society, and you don't know when that could swing either way. And so that was, I think, a concern of mine, but also just, I mean, when you step away from that and you look at the irony of, like, who cares about me, like, there's way bigger fish to fry out there than whether I've been executed because of crimes against humanity. I mean, it's just was hilarious.
Did you ever figure out who it was?
Yeah, no, and it's that was actually kind of a fun part. We have a couple good friends who we'll go down random rabbit holes just for the sake of wasting time. And a bunch of years ago, there was a German guy who did a South Pole expedition and claimed to have the speed record in like 14 days. So he basically took like 10 days off of the prior record, which is, I don't like to say anything is impossible, but it was like, that was impossible. And he had no prior experience. Long story short, he made up the entire expedition. And the information just kind of slowly started rolling out. And so my buddy and we were calling each other every night and researching and trying to, I found this and I found this tweet over here or whatever. And so, yeah, it was kind of that same thing where we did a little research, and it's hard to know, like, anybody could put up a fake identity, but after talking to a few people, I ended up calling like a police department of where this guy was from, and they were very kind of like aware of who that dude was, and had
oh, really?
Yeah, he had a few kind of potentially similar run-ins with a bunch of other stuff. And then I also had some good conversation with just some friends who had, like you said, dealt with similar things. Like, these things can happen to anybody nowadays, which is, another negative aspect of social media as well. And they just gave me some pretty good advice about that situation, and the fact that at a certain point, those people do need to be held accountable, and that can change things dramatically. It's like, if somebody compared to like shoplifting, it's like, a person might be more apt to shoplift if there's nothing there, but you put up some cameras or a security guard, and now all of a sudden you're accountable. And even though you might want to do it, you're not. So there was some good analogies there, and I had some good conversations with it. But it was And I would say the bigger annoying thing to me is like, it was just a big waste of time. It's like being a one-man band, like I need every minute, and I also need my work mojo, like I need to have my pen here and my thing here, and okay, don't read the news. And, so when I get in those moments and that's when I get stuff done. And so like to be involved in some sort of stupid thing for a few days, it's just like a waste of time.
No, that is frustrating. I think about that a lot. It's we're sharing everything nowadays, right? Doesn't matter the what platform you're on, but you're sharing your kids, you're sharing what you're eating, you're sharing, snow outside your house, you're sharing your house. Just literally, people are just sharing everything all the time, and that is, there are and there always will be some sick people out
Yeah.
there, and if they want to latch on to you for whatever reason, it gives them it makes it very easy for them.
Yeah.
Let's just say
Yeah,
that.
totally. Yeah. So lesson learned, move on. I will say the positive side. I don't necessarily, I've been lucky. I've been unlucky. I don't tend to dwell on the negative aspects of life. And so in any of these situations, it could be pretty easy to just like curl up in a ball and give up. And I just seem to be able to brush it off, lesson learned, be wary for the next time, and then move on and find the next little piece of good or positivity or whatever it is.
That's the only way to do it, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I did get scammed a while ago, and go back in my blog and you'll see it, but I got a inquiry about a speaking gig in South Africa that was a total scam. And that was a funny one because I was just like, oh, if this guy's going to waste my time, I'm going to waste his time. And so I just kind of started down this path of crazier answers for maybe about 20 emails or something. That was pretty fun. But this guy was like, I don't know if that's a good choice.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So I know this year has been difficult for everyone, and especially for, I think, outdoors, just because, canceled flights, places are closed. It's yeah, for everyone. But do you have any sort of mission or expedition that you were kind of brewing on and thinking
Oh,
of
yeah.
doing it maybe next year, maybe the year after?
Yeah, well, I'm still on this United States of Adventure project, which is doing these multi-sport border to border traverses of states. I've done Wisconsin, New York, Colorado, and then we did Kansas this summer, right before it broke my collarbone. So I still have a bunch of those states that I'd like to do. I do kind of a polar training course in northern Minnesota. I'll be doing that in the beginning of January. I had a bunch of other guiding things lined up, as well as bigger expeditions that we're just canceling or delaying. I do have a North Pole expedition, and we'll probably end up having to go to Norway and quarantine for 10 days before we go there. And then maybe Greenland, another guiding gig. But my kind of big trips that we were planning this year, kind of the expedition style things, we put it off another year. And, it's frustrating in that moment, but a year is nothing, and I've learned that it's oftentimes better to just wait than kind of try to hammer things in. And then the reality is like so much travel is just not possible right now. And the funding is really difficult, with the kind of terrible economy and all this other stuff. So the failures are so common, and the kind of obstacles, it's just how it goes. And so it's not a gallows humor, but it's just, you have a realistic reckoning with how the world works. And for me, that allows me to kind of keep going and find the areas where I can operate and focus on what I can do to hopefully do something in the future. I do kind of look at myself right now as like a coiled spring, though, like just waiting to release once everything opens up and once we get vaccinated or whatever happens.
Yeah, I feel like we're all kind of feeling like that. I feel like I get a little stir crazy sometimes in the house. I'll just go and do a run at night or just walk my dog, just something. I just feel like we're just spending way too much time in the house.
Yeah.
And I feel like once it's not going to be all of a sudden. I know it's going to be gradual, but gradually I think we all need to just, I don't know, have one big vacation or something.
Yeah, totally.
Well, man, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the talking to you. Where can people find you? What are the best places? What are the platforms that you're most active on?
Big TikTok guy. Just kidding.
Vine all the way.
MySpace, definitely. No, my website.
Is Instagram the best place?
What's that? Instagram, yeah.
Is
Yeah.
Instagram the best place?
Instagram, EL Explorer on Instagram and Twitter, Polar Explorer Eric Larsen on Facebook, my website, Eric Larsen Explorer. Just Google me, send me an email. Let's talk about winter camping, cold, snow and ice. I'm all about it.
I love it, man. I love the mindset. Thanks so much for coming, talking to me on the podcast today. I had a blast, and maybe we can do. Maybe I'll join one of your explorations next year if it works out. I'd love to do
Yeah,
it.
definitely. I'll send you some information. A lot of fun. Good way to start out. Kind of getting more of that expedition mentality and cold weather experience for whatever type of adventure, for sure.
Awesome, and we'll do it. Thanks again, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Have a good day. Thank you.